I want to take a brief moment to talk about super PACs because these are organizations that are truly becoming absolutely dominant in American politics. Just to give you a sense of how important a role they have played, especially in the Republican presidential campaign, before February, Rick Santorum had only raised about $6.5 million for his presidential campaign. Last month he raised about $9 million after winning a bunch of states, so he had a pretty good turnaround. His super PAC raised $6.7 million during that same time. So what we've seen, especially in the case of Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich, have been candidates who have been able to stay around longer than their financial resources might have allowed them, primarily because of these outside organizations. Flipping through here, looking for my notes. Never write down notes in a notepad that you use for other things. How did these things come about? Well, a couple of years ago, the Supreme Court decided in a case called Citizens United v. FEC that they would go back and take a look at some previous cases that had already been decided. A case from the 1980s called Austin v. Michigan, and of course McConnell v. FEC, the sort of latest big campaign finance ruling that came around. In Citizens United, which was decided on January 21st, 2010, the court overturned limits on corporations and in unions and how much they were able to spend on what are called independent expenditures. These are advertisements that are run independently from the actual campaigns themselves. So the campaigns don't get to go and make those ads, create the ads themselves, and they can't talk to these groups about what kind of message they want to drive. But it's not terribly hard in practice to figure out what kind of message you want to drive. As a matter of fact, earlier in this presidential cycle, Mitt Romney's super PAC, a PAC called Restore Our Future, ran an ad that Romney's presidential campaign had run in 2008. Verbatim, shot for shot, word for word. They just took the old ad and replaced "paid for by Romney for president" with "paid for by Restore Our Future." So technically not coordination, but you can see what kind of restrictions those limits really put on these super PACs. The real big case, however, came a couple of months later in a decision in the D.C. Circuit Court, a case called SpeechNow.org v. FEC. SpeechNow.org is an organization of folks who wanted to start their own, what we now call super PACs. They didn't have a word for them back then. In March of 2010, the district court ruled that they were in fact able to spend as much as they wanted on independent speech to support or oppose a candidate. There are certain words that they can't say. There are certain things that they can't do in terms of coordinating with the actual candidates themselves. But in practice, this is a series of organizations that have been a lot more important to the candidates themselves than anything else, than any other development in campaign finance law over the years. To date, just in the 2012 cycle, there are 392 super PACs that have spent a total of $153 million on the 2012 election. The biggest spenders are spending in the Republican presidential primary. Restore Our Future, the pro-Romney PAC, has spent more than $37 million. The pro-Gingrich Winning Our Future PAC has spent more than $16 million. And I mentioned Santorum's supportive PAC, called the Red, White, and Blue Fund, has already spent almost $7 million. Coupled, that's $60 million on politics. By contrast, a group called Priorities USA Action, which is backed by a number of former top aides to President Obama, has spent about $750,000 on advertisements. Of course, they're spending them in very different places. Romney right now is spending a lot of money campaigning in Louisiana, or spent money before the last weekend's election, campaigning in Louisiana, campaigning in Illinois. Neither of those states are going to be on the table. One of the real tragedies for Romney, just the bad luck moments, is that Virginia, a state in which Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum didn't actually make the ballot, is a state where they probably could have made a little bit of difference, where pro-Romney advertisements could have done something in the general election. Unfortunately, with no opponents, he didn't bother running any primary ads in Virginia. Let's see, in 2010, American Crossroads, the organization that that was alluded to earlier, the Karl Rove-backed group, spent more than $20 million on television advertisements. Coupled together with all of their outside activity, that number was much closer to $80 million in terms of both Crossroads and another organization that was coupled with them called Crossroads GPS, or Grassroots Policy Strategies. I'll give you a hint, though. These side organizations that are all about policy and all about policy making, they're not really. These are organizations that run the same kinds of advertising against candidates, or for candidates in some cases, that the other groups do. There is, there's much more organization on the Republican side at the moment than there is on the Democratic side. The Republicans were sort of prepared for the Citizens United case. They saw it coming. They were able to organize around it a little bit. What we saw then was the formation of what's called the Weaver Terrace Group. This is a group run by, sort of organized by Karl Rove. There's a great story in Politico today that takes a look at some of their ups and downs. But this is an organization of super PACs, an organization of organizations that all get together and figure out where to spend money, how to coordinate their efforts. The Democrats, on the other hand, are really just trying to get the ball rolling. President Obama has been so vehemently opposed to super PACs. You might remember in a State of the Union address a few years ago when he specifically called out the Supreme Court and said the decision had been misinterpreted. The justices themselves in the audience did not agree, Sam Alito specifically. But at the end of the day, the Democrats have been slow to adopt this, slow to adapt and figure out that this is the next strategy, the next way money will get into politics. That has led to some slower fundraising. I mentioned the Priorities USA Action Group has raised only a fraction of what the Republican super PACs have raised. Thanks to Bill Maher, they're about $1 million richer these days. There are other organizations within the Democratic coalition. There's an AFL-CIO PAC. Stephen Colbert's got a PAC. I wouldn't put him on the Democratic side, but even he's got a super PAC. The House candidates, there's a House Majority PAC. There's a Majority PAC that will focus on the Senate. All these organizations are aimed at raising the big bucks that cannot go to the Democratic National Committee or the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee or the candidates themselves. They have to go to outside money. So there is an estimate that we're going to spend somewhere between $6 and $8 billion on this year's elections, and just as we think about how this money is spent, I want to make clear that I'm not coming here preaching against money in politics. The firefighters spend a lot of money on politics. So does everybody else. In 2008. For whether or not you agree with it, the $5 billion that Americans spent on politics elected a president, elected a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House. It got us health care. It got us the Dodd-Frank regulations. It got the stimulus package. Everything that President Obama got in those first 2 years came from that money that was spent in the federal elections, about $5 billion. All told, that year we spent $7 billion on potato chips. So a little bit of perspective, if you will, about how much we spend on politics. Nowadays, however, the money is coming from these new outside organizations in a much different way than it has before. So unless there are any questions, I thank you very much. I appreciate your time.